Hello everyone and welcome back to Snowbound Blood. And it's still Saturday when I'm recording this, but I'm just going to get volume 5 done so I have until Monday. Let's go for volume 5 of Blood and Comfort. Apparently Occeus's route is full of high energy, and then according to Badger, I'll want to play that first before I play Mashiri's, so I can have high action and then slow comfort. So I'm going to take my friend's advice. It's been a few days since your last and very unpleasant shift of field duty. The discovery that you were being tailed, along with your sudden explosion-related disappearance from the corporate comms grid, sent everyone into a tizzy, Sestro and Hamifi especially in their respective ways. And so you spent the last few days on enforced rest. You spent your hours researching, following up with contacts, and consumed with thought. After a near-death scrape or two and several hours of interviews, you're really only a single step closer to answering the question that sits like ice in your gut. Who has the resources and the nerve to execute a theft of this magnitude, get away with it, and put a tail on the planet's top regulator, all while finding the time to engage in online harassment? One thing's for sure, you're going stir crazy here. This sparse respite block won't hold you for long. So, apparently Occeus is in Vastera proper as well, so I feel like I'd probably appreciate this route better if I actually read Vastera, but I'm going to go into it blind because this is what it's all about. Knowledge may be a burden, but ignorance always comes at the cost of character. And I tire of being ignorant, Cecily. Oh, she's wearing different clothes. Well, that's something the two of you have in common. You don't voice that now. You don't voice that thought, of course. The last thing you need right now is to further prod the irritable, impatient bird of prey that's standing in front of you. There's nothing stopping you from indulging in a spot of snappy commentary in the privacy of your mind, however, which is what you're doing at present. It helps with the stress. Somewhat. You've been summoned back to a certain conference room by a certain superior in order to discuss a certain case. With all this certainty going around, you'd have hoped said case would be going far more smoothly. The scene before you is all too familiar. Just being here strikes you with a sense of déjà vu, down to the underlying tension permeating the atmosphere. If anything, said tension is even more pronounced now than it was before. An expected development, really, considering the pragmatic, methodical dispositions of the individuals involved. It's hard not to let the lack of concrete results get under one's skin, when one is either Cecily Yapara or Hamifi Hecrix. You take a deep breath, letting it out in a short huff. I understand your frustration, Miss Hecrix. This investigation has been progressing slower than I'd like it to as well. I can say with certainty, however, that I'm starting to see a larger pattern forming. Furthermore, I have eliminated several potential suspects thus far, and there are still many leads to follow. And if the elaborate indirect attempts on my life and newly established surveillance in the form of a less than discreet girl are anything to go by, I'd say this points to my being on the right track. Hamifi narrows her eyes. The tap-tap-tapping of her pen on the clipboard is a metronome of sorts, a steady auditory accompaniment you narrow in on as she considers your words. You use this lulling conversation to take in her appearance more carefully, and, now that you think about it, this change from her regular business casual look is rather conspicuous. These silks and linens are way too elaborate for your usual meetings. You can't really tell from this angle, but you're sure the back of her new hairdo is as striking as the front. She's always had a good eye for aesthetics. You'd like to think you taught her a thing or two about it. Knowing Hamifi, though, she wouldn't be particularly receptive to this idea. In fact, she would probably have you publicly retract a statement like that and submit a written apology in triplicate, signed and stamped. She might also fine you, or mark you down for insubordination. It kind of depends on the day, really. Anyway, there is a little detail that definitely does not escape your notice. It seems Hamifi has also chosen to integrate quite the colourful bruise into her new ensemble. It's sitting right at the junction between her neck and collarbone, almost deliberately peeking out from under her dress. A loud and clear statement, to be sure. You can only imagine how Sestro was marked in turn. Ooh. Well. Young love. Good for them. She stops her tapping and clicks her pen with a sense of finality. I've decided your next suspect for you. You had a feeling this was where the conversation was going. Only on rare occasions is Hamifi this hands-on with her micromanaging of corporate assets, but you've known her for quite some time. Still, a small, practically negligible part of you wishes that Hamifi would at least ask how you're doing before telling you what you're doing, just once. I already have a list of suspects, all personally handpicked by the two of you. Should I not be sticking to it? We both know that has not stopped you from defying orders on at least 3 occasions thus far. This also happens to be the 3rd time she's brought these transgressions up in this conversation alone. You have to fight the urge to bristle at the comment. The reprimanding superior routine is starting to wear on you. Mother and father above you really wish every single detail didn't always come back to this girl. Talking to her sometimes feels like swallowing knives. You bite back a grimace and silently wait for her to continue. The choice is, admittedly, somewhat personal in nature, but we received a tip from one of our insiders, and given my previous suspicions, I was inclined to look into it immediately. Consider it a special request on my behalf for all the precious time you wasted following that unhinged, voice-changing criminal. Doesn't every request you follow qualify as being on her behalf by default? This is like saying squares categorically differ from rectangles. Pointless semantics. Very well. Who is it that I'm to investigate next, Miss Heckrix? Occeus Colliard, spearhead of our modest number of outsourced researchers. And his field is? Hamifi glances aside for a brief moment. You can practically hear her clench her teeth behind pursed lips. Hematology. Oh, I thought that area of study was largely obsolete nowadays. Your assessment evidently doesn't match his. Her voice drops low, bitter. You don't really understand where this animosity is coming from? His results are unprecedented. This world hasn't seen anything like it before. And this is a bad thing? It's an abhorrently suspicious thing. So is her sudden change in attitude. Is there anything else that drew your attention to him besides the subject of his research? The man is a workaholic to an extreme degree. There's no record of him engaging in recreational activities or using his various granted credits for anything besides bare necessities. Everything he accrues ends up being funneled back into his research, with the exception of hive refurbishment and expansion. He is also notably cagey about technical descriptions during his checkings, but preparing physical demonstration, his exact methods remain unclear. She narrows her eyes, looking particularly disgruntled. Hard to reason with is an understatement. You'll grant it to her that reclusive attitude and frugality would raise a few eyebrows. She seems to be taking it almost personally, though, which still strikes you as odd. What else can you tell me about him? His specific study is built around the extension of life and revitalization. He is consistently impressed on that front, especially among my jade-blooded kin. Oh, you're seeing where this is going. He's impeding on territory that Hamifi would rather leave untouched. Jade-bloods form a rather unique Repetonian subculture in your experience. Unusual, especially in this current day and age, where a fairly homogeneous planet-wide cultural lifestyle is shared across the mass. Only rivaled by the remaining sea dwellers in terms of scarcity, Jades are special in their cultivated ties to one another, bound together by shared knowledge in a manner that borders on the familial. Ordinarily, this concept is only tossed around in relation to the mythical, or, if you're especially lucky and happen to stumble upon it, the inherited. It's a personal thing, what these particular ties mean to each individual. Still, it's something that your species as a whole is aware of. You suppose you can see where she's coming from. The facilitation of life and its myriad intricacies have been passed down for countless generations among her caste. At this point, a knowledge of reduplication has been instilled into them almost as a birthright, as their purpose. Hamifi doesn't want that taken away from her, even potentially. You have an instinctual urge to prod. Maybe digging a little deeper into this would be prudent. You feel it may be clouding her judgment. You decide against it. The last thing you need right now is to further try her patience and have her question your intentions, but you do stow the idea away for later. That, and you can't say Colliard's area of research doesn't bring the stolen vial to mind. The connections to revitalization alone make this doctor a prime suspect. There is reason for suspicion here, even if under unfair pretenses. Hamifi clears her throat. Well, are you just going to stand there and ponder, or should I invite you to act? Always so impatient, this one. There is a lot to consider going into this. Consider it while you move. We've updated your files with his location. You are going to want to leave quickly. You're about to do just that, but you catch something in her expression. It feels like she still has more she wants to say. The longer you stand in the same place, the more likely the parasites are to bite you. She holds your gaze, waiting for you to comment. You raise an eyebrow. Was that a joke? I'm trying my hardest to keep my good mood. You scoff, taking the banter for what it is, an unspoken peace offering between the two of you. Give the air my regards, and have a pleasant time on your outing. Her gaze briefly flits downwards toward her clipboard, and you catch the barest ghost of a smile on her lips. Noted. With a quick flash of colour, you're left alone in the room. And in another, you leave it empty. Ooh. Oh wow. Is this like the elephant graveyard? The plains that stand before you are a desolate, dismal sight. Colossal bones of long-dead creatures litter the landscape, the only points of interest amidst the cracked, jagged edges that make up the scenery. That and the lonely hive that stands a few expanses away. The air is cold here. A dreary fog permeates the area, curling around everything it touches, almost as if it's alive. Wispy, ghostly tendrils circling what little fauna manages to survive in this place. In the distance you hear the faint howl of a black-blooded lusus. It's a lonely sound, a desperate call for a bond it will probably never find. Not out here. All around you, everything seems to whisper a single word. Death. No one ever comes this far out into the undead wasteland, at least not without a damn good reason. You're well aware of yours. And you will not be leaving before you find out what exactly it is that this Colliard fellow is keeping so close to his chest. On that note, it's high time you got an actual move on. You start making your way down the slope towards the Skull Titan graveyard. The terrain here is way too uneven for tyres, and so the bike had to be left behind. You bid us a solemn and silent farewell as you hop over a particularly large crack in the ground. It's not a very steep incline, though. Any difficulty in the descent is more due to the graveyard's inhabitants than any sort of downslope. Maybe difficulty is overstating it. You'd gladly resign from your position as chief regulator if you ever let a bunch of wild lucii and mindless half-dead trolls get in your way. It seems some of these creatures are eager to try their luck, though. As you land on the other side of a small ravine, two trolls whip their heads around and start slowly shambling towards you. You'd call it brave if you didn't get the distinct impression that actions come from lack of higher cognitive functions rather than a sudden bout of courage. Oh well, it would be rude not to indulge them. The ensuing fight, by a loose definition of the word, is quick and straightforward. The undead closest to you, now in striking distance, lunges in your direction. You're already strafing to the right and you dodge with ease. A swift advance to get in better position, your blade through its neck, and it's over. The body slumps in on itself after a couple of seconds with a final wet gurgle. You turn around to face your second opponent. Like the first troll, it tries to grab at you with clumsy, loudly telegraphed movements, and like the first troll, you finish it off in a matter of seconds. Sidestep to the left, use the opening to circle around it, run Proserpina through its chest. Dead. Or rather, dead for a second time, you guess. Double dead? No, that sounds really fucking stupid. You pull your blade out of the corpse with a grunt, and it dislodges itself with a squirt of dark teal blood. Ugh, you're gonna have to give it a thorough wash later. Just as you move to sheath it, you hear a very unpleasant squelching noise. Your eyes snap towards the sound, and you have the distinct feeling you're about to extremely not like this. The carcass at your feet lies completely motionless. Motionless except for the arrhythmic, repetitive strain you're able to make out on the back of its skull, almost as if something is trying to... Before you can finish your thoughts, the skin bursts open with a sickening pop, and bits of rotten flesh and brain matter explode outward, as a handful of writhing vermin make their way out of the troll's head. Ooh. Ew. The parasites that inhabit this stretch of land are peculiar creatures, not very well understood. They were discovered a few decagrades prior, only to start multiplying in droves over the course of the next few sweeps. They tend to stick only to the very specific locations, the graveyard you find yourself in, for example, which likely stems from the abundance of a key component in their means of reproduction: corpses. These creatures burrow inside a troll or Lucis's body, using it as a walking host until their breeding cycle is complete, at which point they exit, only to find a new vessel and start the whole thing anew. It's all rather gruesome and revolting, and it's happening right in front of you right now. Your face contorts into a grimace at the disgusting display. This is absolutely appalling. You hate this place. There's a modicum of satisfaction in squashing the insects under your heel, though. Viscous yellow liquid squirts out when you press down, and the consistency makes you think of spilled jam, the grossest jam you've ever seen. It hardens like a resin when it comes into contact with the crisp winter breeze. Take that, you nasty little fiends. No more corpses for you. You mentally congratulate yourself on the impromptu bout of pest control before sheathing your rapier and... What? Beneath your feet, the sudden tremors reach a deafening crescendo until a gargantuan figure shoots from the ground below you. You're knocked flat on your ass. You blink. The action is enough to nearly have you miss the cavernous gaping maw of an ooh-worm, as it claims your 2 kills for itself with an enthusiasm befitting a 6-star full-course meal. Wait, is it navy-blooded? It's very hard for you to imagine such a detestable, vicious creature forming any sort of genuine attachment to a troll, unless it had something to gain out of the arrangement, that is. Natural lucite often require their bonds to be symbiotic in some manner, a far cry from the instinctual caretaker leanings the domesticated, artificially reduplicated corporate lucite tend to exhibit. A chunk of what used to be someone's thigh flies through the air, landing right next to your feet. You would really rather not have to deal with that beast in close proximity, if you can help it. With that in mind, you stand back upright, dust your coat off, and start speedwalking toward your destination, in as dignified and professional a manner as you can manage. It ends up being somewhat stiff. The rest of your trek is far less eventful than the first few minutes. His hive is really not very hard to spot, an elaborate modern building that you usually wouldn't find any sub-purple trolls residing in. You have to admit, though, you find the placement of it a tad questionable. Personally, you would not have built your home smack dab in the middle of a monster's long-since brittled ribcage, right in the spot where a heart should be. You guess it makes a statement of sorts? Oh well, to each their own. A few minutes later, and you find yourself standing in front of an excessively large set of double doors. You see no way to properly knock on the entry slabs, no gaudy rings, no bells, no whistles, not even a communications box or a standard issue PA system. You almost take offence to it. Really, any non-modest living space that's worth its salt should have at least one of those. It sends a very apathetic message to any hypothetical guests otherwise. Before you can consider whether it's wise to loiter in the middle of one of the most uninhabitable places the mass has to offer, the doors begin to clunk and creak. It takes a moment, but you spot the silhouette of what you assume is your man. He's still wreathed in shadows when you greet him. Oh jeez. Hello, Dr. Colliard. My name is Cecily Yapat... Grah! Oh, so that's who Rogie is. A rotund, hunchback creature stitched together like a well-worn tapestry greets you at the threshold. Somehow you get the impression that it's trying to communicate the feeling of equal greetings to you. It fixes you with a hollow, yet oddly earnest stare. You were not expecting to be expected. Greetings? Is it he? Simply blinks up at you. Rah! This is not the individual you thought would be welcoming you. You furrow your eyebrows, taking in the short little living thing that's now stepped into the light, peeking its head out inquisitively. You've never seen anything like it before. Could it be one of those daring experiments Hamifi mentioned back in her office? It certainly seems to be cobbled together from different parts, from what you can tell. Impressive and unprecedented results in the field indeed. Do you understand me? It tilts its head to the side in a manner quite similar to that of a bark beast, and it lets out a quiet, curious groan. It's almost endearing. You sigh. No, I don't suppose you would. You enact a number of interpretive hand motions at the creature, trying to convey the idea of doors opening and safe passage. It's like you're playing a slightly manic game of charades. Despite your great efforts, it still refuses to budge from its place. The only reaction you get is a quiet clap of coarse, slightly wrinkled hands. And more indistinct vocalizations. Speaking of which, guttural gurgles echo across the landscape, steadily getting louder. The imminent company will soon be impossible to ignore. You glance at the critter. It looks back at you with its beady, innocent little eyes. Oh, damn it all, you can't bring yourself to shove it out of your way. Resigning yourself to another series of butchery-related unpleasantries, you spin on your heels. Your hand hovers over your revolver as you gear up to face the incoming aggressors. You already got a solid smattering of gunk on your soles. You would really rather not risk your coat. One of the putrescent beings chooses this moment to vomit on the ground in front of it. You wince. It must be an uncontrolled reaction to exertion, which you can't help but see as a threat to the continued cleanliness of your attire. This better be some man. As if on cue, the clack of what sounds like steel-toed boots rings out from the dark hole that your puzzling new acquaintance was guarding. You turn your head just in time to catch it scuttling aside for, oh, there he is. You finally see your suspect, one Occeus Coliad, making his entrance from stage left. You're fairly certain this is not a repeat of the previous identity mishap. Do excuse me for the wait, miss. Oh dear. With the effortless calm that comes with practice, he advances towards the nearest cluster of trolls and plunges his boot directly into one of their midsections. The manoeuvre not only rockets the troll's entrails out through its rotten back, but also sends all of the nearby reanimated corpses tumbling down with it. A familiar tremor rattles you. Seconds later, you become intimately acquainted with the gluttonous jaws of the ourworm, as it bursts through the dirt to swallow all three cadavers whole. Sweet all-mother, you really hate that thing. You may also feel ever so slightly terrified of it. The encounter barely phases him. There is the briefest pause before he turns back to you with what you can only describe as an unperturbed expression. Apologies once again, Miss Yopara. That was quite the unnecessary spectacle. He scrapes his boots on the ground, getting some of the undead gunk off his soles. At least your shoes match. Perhaps we should continue this inside. Won't you please come in? Gladly so. You're led into his hive, at last. You peer around at the various bits of machinery and cables with some amount of curiosity. There's a loud creaking as Coliad's assistant closes the doors behind you. It scurries off to his side and peeks at you from behind his torso as the three of you make your way down the hall. You fight the urge to give it a little wave before turning your attention back to your target. You were expecting me? Hamifi and I are in regular communication, and she was gracious enough to notify me of your arrival. Standard procedure for contractors. Ah, of course, standard procedure. Her reputation of being by the book does lend a certain veneer of credibility to this blatant spying. Still a wonder he never figured anything was out of the ordinary. She tends to have a lighter touch. Maybe you should be writing her up for such an obvious ploy. You take a closer look at him, the stiff set of his shoulders, the slight crease of his mouth. It's subtle, but he seems nervous, twitchy. Perhaps it's time to start applying some pressure. You don't seem particularly thrilled about my being here. I don't get many visitors. He glances to the side, readjusting his arms behind his back. The rubber gloves creak with the motion. And it would be incorrect to claim that this typically saddens me. You can certainly relate to the sentiment, if that's all there is to it. Sometimes the best company you can have is your own. The moment passes, and once again he schools his features into a cool, focused neutrality. Looking at him now, one would be surprised if a single muscle in his set jaw so much as twitched. Just then, the corridor opens up into a lab. It's what you'd expect from the usual researcher paraphernalia. Books, test tubes, various charts, an enormous computer pressed against the back wall, a tea table. Wait a second, is that an operating table? Huh. Please excuse the extent of the disarray. I was told that you were coming on very short notice and had to rush disposal. Disposal? The lab needed to be purified post-haste for your arrival. I also had to make us tea. Yay, tea! That is why it took me so long to meet you at the door. He was making tea? You really did not have to go out of your way to do this for me. Nonsense, it is common courtesy. It really isn't, not when one chooses to pursue a career like yours. The effort is quaint, and you appreciate it, even if it's not the most hygienic of choices. You're not usually received so hospitably when you drop by for hive calls. You also don't have the chroma beater to tell him that you really don't care for tea. Warm milk mixed with the usual sugary fruits and cocoa powder just doesn't sit right with you, mainly due to the grit. You're very picky about texture. Make yourself as comfortable as possible. I recommend the cream biscuits. My assistant Rogi prepared them. They are also fresh. Oh, so he does have a name. Of course. He lays a hand on one of Rogi's shoulders. You must always title your proudest achievements. Eee! You suppose you can't really argue with logic like that. Finding yourself trapped by the expectation of good manners, you sit down at the makeshift table and tentatively take a bite of one of the pastries under Rogi's expectant watch. It's sweet, extremely overly so, to the point where you feel like you just slurped the caramelised syrup straight out of a finished cigarette. Still, you give him your nod of approval. He claps excitedly. Aww. A long silence falls over the lab. This day must be getting to you because your mind drifts. You imagine yourself lying on this table, not an investigator, but a victim awaiting an autopsy. It's a silly thought, and you quickly dismiss it. In all fairness, being in Koliad's company is much more comfortable than you anticipated. You feel that if he were a coroner, he would at the very least take due consideration with your dead body. You suddenly feel the pressing need to break the silence. Your contracting has a rather unique set of circumstances attached to it. There's not really anyone doing work like yours outside of jade-blooded practitioners, and even then I would say you seem to fit rather snugly into your own personal category. Must be laborious. I prefer to think of it as necessary more than anything. He's still not sitting with you, just standing there next to Rogi, vacantly staring at a spot on the wall. The goggles make it a bit challenging to puzzle out what he's thinking, honestly. The only thing you can tell is that he's nervous, gloved fingers anxiously pulling at one another behind his back. He looks like he wants to say something, but can't find the proper words to start with. The entire situation is much different than what you're expecting based on your conversation with Hamifi, leagues apart really. You went in fully prepared to be met with resistance, perhaps immediately run into something sinister. At the very least, you were ready to deal with a stiff, uncooperative recluse with a chip on his shoulder. But instead, in front of you, there is an anxious, overly polite man, more a boy to you really, who made you tea before opening the door and had his assistant prepare you biscuits. You go as far as to say that he's entirely unaware of his present circumstances, and you're loath to imply this, but maybe Hamifi was a bit hasty in her assumption. Still, you're not willing to let first impressions lead you astray. Not again. You're here for a reason, and you will conduct your investigation. Perhaps some casual conversation will lead you down the right path, if there's one to be followed. That, and you'd like to have a better profile on Koliad. You decide to inquire about... Yeah, Rogi! You've been quite curious about this creation of his. Rogi seems to have a certain level of autonomous thought, along with base emotions and spontaneous reactions to stimuli. Very developed motor skills, too. You wonder if that's what got him on the corporate payroll in the first place. I've been led to believe that your indictment into the corporate fold was under rather unique circumstances. Might I ask what you did to win the representative's favour? Rogi here definitely seems to be worthy of attention. Actually, he came about a decent while later. I was first able to reach out to the board through an extensive essay titled Examining Yields of Everlasting Sustainment, in which I documented research focusing on a hypothetical method of cellular decay reversal in all major blood shades. The concept of prolonged sustainment of life in the face of entropy, and the methods in which it could further grow society at large. This is all rather philosophical in nature. From the results you've seen of his research so far, you're expecting something more along the lines of hard science and applied biology. I am a very broad and ambitious it is a very broad and ambitious proposition that I am happy they decided to listen to. I was always worried others would find my ideas to be unrealistic. Luckily, I was able to prove myself with my serums, even if any subsequent subjects I used to test my hypothesis turned out to be less than savoury in the end. Well, that's a rather harsh thing to say about him, don't you think? Rogi sounds aggravated. Yes, I know, I'm trying to defend you. You guess you're actually holding a conversation with him now. I believe he is trying to say that he's not who I am referring to. Rogi was a personal project co-created by myself and my associate as an experiment in adaptability and personality. He pats Rogi on the head fondly, which ended up being quite successful, I think. So you're saying he's not the norm when it comes to your test subjects? He is rather unique in that he lacks the usual disposition found in the others. Upon revitalization, most of them are sent into a frenzy. I assume it is the trauma of being forcefully brought back from wherever it is they had been lost to. You find the matter-of-fact way that says the wherever portion to be quite telling. Certainly not a follower of the All-Mother's word, nor of the Naught Father. Perhaps he's not a follower of anything. It could be where he finds the will to carry on with his research. Morality can turn grey without the thought of a higher entity breathing down your neck. You'd be lying if you said the whole thing didn't leave you feeling a bit uneasy. This doesn't seem like an area of study one should be tampering with so liberally. You wonder how something this unorthodox was given the go-ahead in the first place. Their attempts at salvation must be getting rather desperate. If you had to make a guess, Sestro and Hamifi must have been outnumbered by the other board members and trustees, perhaps even executively. What do you figure makes Rogi different from the rest? I am uncertain at the moment. My current working theory is that since he was created entirely from scratch without any pre-mortem individuality to speak of, the lack of a, shall we say, previous soul acts as an inhibitor to the inherently painful and negative, which isn't to say he doesn't have feelings. He simply works through them at a slower and less intense pace than most. Sounds like you have a good grasp at the situation then, Doctor. Koliad looks away from you, flushing. He seems weakened by the statement. Did I say something wrong? No. It's just... well, I haven't had the pleasure of being called Doctor directly very often. You suddenly feel very old. You're a supercomputer. You recognise the exact model in his possession. It's corporate grade and very similar to the ones used to modify DNA strains in the reduplication labs. Maybe he needs this for work because of the raw processing power. Still seems like an oddly specific piece of equipment to have just lying around. Is that your workstation? Oh no, it isn't. I sadly do not have the time to utilise the device as planned. It has been modified from its original state in order to better monitor certain parameters. Well, these computers do excel at running large amounts of data at a time. What kind of information are you recording? Audible musings of the potentially extranatural with the objective of establishing contact. Oh shit, not this again. What is it with these suspects lately? You really should not be messing with this kind of crap, it never ends well. You know it from experience now. There's no need to be alarmed by the potential liabilities of such an idea. The process proves to be more draining than anything. I have never once heard anything besides a droning noise. It is very annoying, actually. Once it worms its way into your head, it does not tend to leave. And this sound may be persistent, but at this point I am not nearly as much. Still, that's a treacherous field to be playing in. What practical use does all of this data even have? He shrugs his shoulders, seemingly at a loss. I cannot say with certainty, as the statistics have not answered my most pressing questions thus far. The entire project is no more than a pipe dream at this point. One which I have no real way to execute in the long term. Something's still not sitting quite right with you, though. You decide to prod further. Well, let us speak strictly in hypotheticals then. What do you wish you could get out of this? He seems to take a deep dive inside his thoughts before pulling out the right words, offering them to you bluntly, almost as a dare. Untethered immortality. That's bold, and starting to run closer to what you came here to find. You view that as something to aspire to? I view it as a potentially necessary thing. But as I said, it is highly improbable to never happen on a wide scale. No one has the means to execute such an idea. That isn't exactly true, depending on who has that filter on hand, or what Goliad himself can do with such an object. He'd be able to bring all of his aspirations to fruition, all of that without a hint of involvement with corporate. Hell, he could end up rivaling it. You think you understand just why Hermephi's had her eyes trained on him. This is leading you right back to the prime suspect line of thinking you were starting to doubt your need. That and it all sounds incredibly dangerous to you regardless. You can only hope Dr. Goliad keeps his senses and no longer meddles with forces he cannot control. Goggles. You can't avoid the rather unusual set of eyewear that Goliad has on. Its shape resembles that of common Ashen symbolism, although you imagine that's coincidental. The thought that he has been using it to protect himself from fluids and chemicals comes to mind, but from what he's told you, all he did before you got here was take care of basic disposal and make tea. Such a distinct shape can't be used for no reason whatsoever, though, can it? Perhaps if you're nice enough, he will let you in on such a self-evident secret. There's really no need to be so guarded around me, Dr. Goliad. Pardon? Normally you prefer to instill a degree of intimidation in the people you talk to. It's conducive to the kind of work you do, part of the job description. I cannot speak. Job description, really. But if you want him to open up, you feel as if a gentle touch would work better. You're still fully dressed for lab work, even though I doubt we'll be doing any experimenting anytime soon. Please feel free to remove your gloves and your goggles. This is your hive, after all. I see no reason for you to stand there while I sit down at your table. I assure you I would not find that unprofessional. The indigo blood freezes at the proposition. His head snaps to you just as his hands ball into fists. He opens his mouth and abruptly closes it again. You can practically hear his thoughts shooting around in his head, an expanse per minute, as you watch it on with mounting concern. With every second that passes, the silence seems more tense. Goliad is visibly shaking. Before he can think of how to intervene, he clasps his forehead right over the middle lens of his spectacles. Are you okay, Doctor? I think I would much prefer to proceed with my trioc on. His voice is strained. The behaviour leaves you baffled. Is this some sort of onset migraine from overexertion? You have trouble believing that such a straightforward request would leave anybody debilitated like this. It's not you. It just... well, it opens old wounds that I still don't fully comprehend, for lack of a better explanation. Please do not fret over it. You didn't know. You weren't fretting over it before. Seems your curiosity struck a sensitive nerve. You're just going to have to hold it in for now. This topic clearly puts him under a lot of stress. The exact wording sticks out to you, though. You're no stranger to feeling less than satisfied with your features, but for his eyes to be a source of such distress? Oh well, it's not really any of your business. Well, it seems like you managed to find your path. Coliad is even more linked to the ideas surrounding the Vivify than you initially thought. And you've managed to keep an amicable atmosphere to boot. You hope it will be useful in getting him to open up, or let something slip. Time to get to the real investigative questions. Not to sound blunt, Dr. Coliad, you've been an excellent host so far, more than I expected, but I do believe it's time I got to the reason why I'm here in the first place. Tell me more about how you do your work. You're reluctant to tell him the exact reason why you need this information. For all he knows, you're just here on a general business check-in. Regardless, the reaction you get is nothing short of ecstatic. Oh well, as ecstatic as it can get when it comes to someone with Coliad's disposition. Still, it's noticeable how the topic seems to suffuse him with energy. Well, you see, outside of what I have already told you, my cause is to find a way to extend the duration of current Reptonian lives. A life expectancy between 28 and 55 sweeps is rather dismal compared to anything pre-Renaissance. However, in order to properly manipulate the faculties of life, we need to understand how it is created and how it can be restored. This is where my study comes in. The examination of whether and how life can potentially be returned to an individual post-mortem and reinvigorated. Some consider this practice ethically dubious, but I am of the mind that restoring our losses is the first step to our eventual recovery. The more we can save, the more we can utilise, the more manpower we will have in order to rebuild Repeton and achieve lasting peace and prosperity. Your eyes have glazed over. A pregnant pause settles over the room as you both stare at each other. You think he's expecting you to say something, but you struggle to formulate a response. Your expression does all the legwork. He clears his throat, a light blue flush peeking out from under his goggles. It's not that you're bored exactly, it's just you asked for a demonstration, not an entire sweep's worth of theoretical ramblings to fill your head with. Regardless, I do not know if you would understand were I to explain it in raw technicals. This somehow doesn't sound condescending coming from him. Credit where credit is due. What would you propose we do then? I'd still like to get a better idea of the results your process yields. Well, I currently find myself with no usable cadavers, nor a way to stitch one together. I would need to refer to my associate for that, and it would take much too long. The only option I could see being viable would be to go outside and obtain one for a live demonstration. It would need to be a fresh pick in order for it to work, though. Recently infected as to not allow for heavy rot or extraneous trauma. Odd. You didn't think he'd be so eager to share his work from what Hamifi relayed to you. Could she really have been off the mark with this assignment? Perhaps any connections between his research and your missing vial are merely coincidences. Is he about to attack us or something? Should have pressed her on the topic. Those two have the habit of clouding your judgment. That sounds agreeable. He's about to fucking attack us, isn't he? Excellent. We shall leave and return post-haste. Now, to be clear, this is for... Oh, do not worry, we will try our hardest to not leave you waiting for long. Come, Rogi, we are burning moonlight by just standing here talking at Miss Yapara and not showing her. And just like that, he leaves through the same hallway you entered in, his assistant faithfully trailing behind. Oh, he's not going to attack us, it's fine. You hear the familiar creaking of his front door opening a few seconds later, and then silence. He just left? Hamifi did say he preferred physical demonstrations, but this is almost comical. You barely had a moment to process what was happening. You wouldn't have been able to stop him even if you'd wanted to. This is such a notoriously bad move on his part. You can't make heads or tails of it. There is a high-ranking corporate operative inside his hive, sent specifically to investigate him and his methods, and he didn't even realise leaving you to your own devices might not be the wisest of ideas? Boggling. Or it would be, provided he was in any capacity involved in the events you were investigating, which has become questionable after this stunt, because come on, but still. How can somebody so evidently smart be also so oblivious? You feel almost morally obligated to conduct an investigation just to teach him a lesson in situational awareness. Alas, you won't be doing it for that reason. You'll be doing it for regular business reasons, as planned. If anything, Goliard's absence means that he's less likely to get upset at witnessing your more hands-on methods. Thank you for that much, Doctor. Eves chooses this moment to pipe in, almost knowingly. The sudden chime definitely does not make you startle. Apparently your new companion comes with a full body scan mechanism that integrates it with your cognition somewhat. You're still not used to these notifications going off whenever you get those investigative emotions going. Orica may be a dangerously brilliant engineer and a friend, but you found out the hard way that streamlining interface systems is not exactly her forte. A good portion of your 2-night study period was spent just figuring out how to even work the gadget. You've lost count of how many widgets you had to remove for ease of access. Really, all you want is to be able to record your increments without a complete report of your emotional vital signs relayed to you through emoticons, or emojis, or stickers, or whatever. You were saying, time to get to work. You don't know how long it will take him to obtain a specimen. From what you've seen, he is more than capable of handling himself, and there are a lot of undead roaming the graveyard. You can only search what you deem to be conducive to the investigation proper, no dallying. Might as well go with the most laborious option first. All these cabinets are just begging to be rifled through. You pick the one closest to you to start, which is a dresser by the massive computer. You take a cursory glance at the books sitting on top of it, various schematics and other scientific resources. The spoils of your actual search are similarly disappointing. Flasks, tubes, extra pairs of gloves, scalpels, nothing out of the ordinary here. Eventually you're just left with the big cupboard at the end of the room. You're not expecting much at this point. Everything you've seen has been innocuous enough so far, but you're nothing if not thorough. You pull the double doors open and do a quick inventory of its contents. Cleaning tools mostly. Just as you're about to close them back up, a bottle rolls out from underneath some towels, landing on the ground with a thump. You furrow your eyebrows, picking it up and examining the label. It's liquid dye? Strange. You don't remember finding anything else around this hive that would indicate an interest in the arts and crafts. You lift the cloth that was hiding it from view. Underneath there's even more bottles of the stuff in various colours. The entire display is rather conspicuously tucked away. Very strange. You ponder for a moment, but no plausible explanations come to mind. You're not sure what to make of this. After another moment of deliberation, you shrug and stow the item back into its original place. You will have to tuck this observation away for later. Your curiosity pecks at you, however. There's a feeling that you haven't quite been able to shake off since your fun little interview. If what Goliard said about searching for untethered immortality is true, then there must be something about it on his computer, some thread that you could follow. You walk over. You fiddle with the keys and knobs for several seconds before you somehow stumble onto the power button. What you find shocks you. Absolutely nothing. Well, not absolutely nothing. You search through the direct files on his various inventories, but you only find old notes and musings that aren't exactly intelligible. Something about a transmuted epiphysis cerebri points up, but whatever he's discussing seems out of focus beyond rational thought. A test file perhaps, or some sort of private joke, though he doesn't strike you as the type for random bouts of humour. You try to search for any kind of software, modified or otherwise, that he could be using to make contact with the outside forces he spoke of, but you still find nothing. This entire machine is practically wiped clean. He doesn't even have a custom wallpaper. You do notice he has Scorp though, the only application currently running. This is a bit of a gamble, but perhaps there's something to be found amid his discussions with his so-called associates. You decide to take that chance. It seems that all of Goliard's recent Scorp calls have been from Hemifi, not much of interest there. You start scrolling through his recent conversation logs and contact lists, only to find them practically barren. When you investigated Ripite, his conversations were frequent, friendly, colourful. Goliard, on the other hand, seems to almost never message anyone. Sanguine Allegory, Weiss's and No Contact, Demiurge Quantified, over 2 blinks of silence, Pliable Decadence, no contact at all, Windless Artificer and Furbish Facilitated are a little more recent. You believe the former is the work partner he mentioned earlier, whereas the latter seems to be giving him a bit of a cold shoulder. You reach Grandiose Saturation, who he quickly surmises one called a Carrion, somebody who you're frankly surprised isn't on your suspect list. Their last message dates sweeps back, almost 2 to be exact. You don't spend much time on them, but you note just how different they both sound in the messages you read. They're practically still children. Calder seems raw, like he's on the verge of breaking. You don't feel comfortable reading these specific messages further. The others continue to be less than useful until you get to one animated humorist. You stare at the sign next to their chat handle. Isn't this the sigil that Husker and their group painted over the barn's wall, the sign of their saviour? Upon closer inspection, the blood colour matches as well. It's the exact same shade, just to the left of bronze, that makes you think of high fructose corn syrup. This must be your mind playing tricks on you after that concussion. A sigil like this should never have been on record, not anymore. A person like this shouldn't exist. It is then that your eyes catch on another chat handle. Existere Oracle. I'm sure that if I had read Vastera I would know exactly who these people are, but You skipped over the name at first, assuming it was simply another shade of olive, but upon further inspection, the hex code lines up almost exactly with the picture of the filter in your dossier. You glance to the left of it. Sweet fucking Allmother, the sigils match, you know they do. No one alive on Repton today is ignorant of this symbol, not with the impact it has had on this planet's history. This can't be real. The Vivifier was never reduplicated. No trace of her was ever found or arguably even existed until your case. You open the chat log. The last communication was a couple of nights ago. You skim through the conversation, talk of experiments, of promising results, of replenishing the stock, and of love? The last part cannot possibly be genuine. By the end of it, you're gripping the desk so hard your knuckles have turned white. Pieces of the puzzle start snapping together in your mind as you try to make sense of what you're reading. These are symbols you've only seen noted in cheap fiction, among cults searching for someone to give their lives meaning, in stories passed through word of mouth that nobody dares to claim to be true. You tell yourself that you're dreaming, or that you're just friends with trolls who roleplayed legendary figures as a pastime. You go through every excuse to try and rationalise what this could be other than a case blown wide open. But you don't buy it. You don't buy that a young girl named Elsie Rains doesn't exist, and that the blood stored in Collier's laboratory isn't hers, that she has nothing to do with the marvels of science that have put him on corporate's payroll. You don't believe the smokescreen of pleasantries and dyes he tries to disguise this with. Who are these trolls? How come they even exist? And what does this mean for the case, for you? These are questions you don't have answers to. You don't think Colliard really knows either. None of these logs seem to suggest that he might have orchestrated any of these encounters. It all just seems so natural. Like it was destined. Maybe you being here was destined as well. You can't risk losing this. You need a backup of this information, something more physical than usual. Time to test one of Eve's upgraded features. Or is it Ives? Eve's? I don't know. You press a button on your scouter and Eve scans the monitor, taking the relevant snapshot. It's safely stored in an allocated folder. With the information secured, you whip your head around and your eyes immediately land on a single point of focus, the door at the back, which you now know serves as storage. You rush towards it, pushing it open with so much force it slams against the wall and rattles on its hinges. Oh shit! I'll have to kind of put a warning on this. That's a lot of fucking blood. There by the left wall, 2 cylindrical storage units. You barely pause before storming towards them. Just as you expected, the door is unlocked, like everything else has been in this hive so far. It slides open with a hiss, and a blast of cool air hits you square in the face. The tendrils of mist dissipate in front of your eyes, and you feel a chill run down your spine. It has nothing to do with the temperature. You stare petrified at the shelves in front of you. Ugh. Rows upon rows of vials, filled with blood, lime blood, Elsie's blood, the Vivifier's blood. Your right hand grips the handle so hard you can feel your fist shaking. This is not what you came here for. At the same time, it is exactly what you were looking for. Your head swims, and for a second you feel as if you're going to be sick. Then all at once your turmoil comes to a boiling point inside you and you're seething. He nearly tricked you. On impulse, you reach out and grab one of the damned filters. You're probably gripping it with more force than you should, but you can't bring yourself to give a shit. You stare at the contents. They're a vibrant green, all but shimmering in the artificial light, and not liquid as much as a thicker gel-like texture. The chilled glass burns your fingertips. You fight the urge to smash the thing into the ground. There's noise coming from the other room. You hear moans from Rogi, the familiar steel-toed step of Koliad's boots and scraping like something is being dragged on the floor. Probably the body they intended to use this very blood on for demonstration. Oh shit! Miss Yapara, where are you? Your voice sounds like venom, even to your own ears. In here, Koliad. After a brief exchange with Rogi, he steps inside the room. You barely take note of his bloody clothes. You will take me to Elsie Raines. The safety catch of your gun releases with a click. You aim at his chest. Oh, this is spooky! Koliad freezes at the threshold and slowly raises his hands up. He speaks up before you have the chance to. How did you find out her name? The words leave your mouth almost as a snarl. You might want to give the little thing called a password a try. And stop stalling. You're not getting out of this one, Doctor. His voice takes on a pacifying tone, like he's talking to a wild animal. It makes you want to aim for his leg and pull the trigger. I have no intention of walking out of this, and I know that you don't either. In fact, I thought this confrontation a distinct possibility from the moment you stepped inside my home. But please let me explain. I utilize Elsie's blood for my research because she allows me the privilege. The only reason it's kept secret is because it cannot fall into the wrong hands. Your own hand tightens around the revolver. A bark of laughter claws its way out of you, humourless. And I suppose the right hands would be yours. Please. Part of you realises there's no reason to argue with him, and yet the words spill out of you before you can stop them. You're keeping a vital, groundbreaking asset from the only institution on this fucking planet that has the necessary resource to do something tangible with it. Right under their noses, no less. Do you really think yourself better than the entire body of researchers at corporate's disposal? Or do you just want all the glory for yourself? No. I don't think I am better than anyone else. I am simply trying to do right by our species and our planet. I want to help as many before me have tried to. Perhaps my hands are not the ones you and corporate would deem most fit to handle power such as this. He pauses, steeling himself. But it is not your choice to make, Miss Yapara. It is hers. She trusts me to use her gifts correctly, and I simply trust her judgments in turn. You scoff. The revolver is still trained on his blood pusher. Oh, will you cut the bullshit? You still think this Ernix act has any chance of sticking? After what you've told me, after what I've seen here? You expect me to believe that you're on some sort of noble crusade to protect this Elsie when we're standing right in front of shelves upon shelves of her own blood? At least have the nerve to admit you don't want to lose your precious lab rat. He immediately stiffens at your words, and there we go, you think. The mask is off. His anger bubbles to the surface and you gear up for confrontation. You are taking him with you, willingly or by force. How dare you? How dare you demean her? You know nothing of what she has done for me. She saved me. What? The lab rat you so desperately wish for me to see her as. She is the salvation of this planet and the love of my life. I will not allow corporate to lock her away and treat her as a walking test subject. Not for any price. Not for any reason. And if you refuse to listen to her will... He draws his weapon and the finger you have on the trigger twitches reflexively. The raw intensity in Occeus's voice makes you still your hand. Then I will either kill for her or die for her right to be free. The words echo across the room, bouncing off the walls sharp, and they stick, ringing in your ears, inside your mind. It's like a cold pail of liquid has just washed over your body. The red haze leaves your vision. In front of you, you see unsteady, trembling hands pointing a weapon in your direction. You see devotion and a fierce desire to protect at all costs. You see a child, not even half your age. You see yourself, 12 sweeps old, rather what you wish you could have been. For her. The vial you're still holding feels heavy in your hand. Aye. Tell me about her. This catches him off guard, and it does you too. You're not sure why you're asking. What? Tell me about Elsie. He stares at you for a few tense seconds, chest heaving before taking in a shaky breath. She is so very unique. There is so much of her shrouded in a dense fog of mystique. She is host to a power the likes of which the world has not seen in centenalia. So many would rend her limb from limb in order to obtain it, and yet she perseveres through every unfair hand she's dealt. Perseveres, God. Her passion towards those she cares about rivals any work I could ever hope to do. His voice softens at the next words, and your throat constricts. She loves to dance. Oh! She trusts others, maybe a little too much. And I know that she craves company desperately. The kind that I more often than not cannot provide in this line of work, even though she deserves it and so much more. I do not get to see her as often as I would like, but even when she complains and gets frustrated, she still believes in me. And whenever I get to see her smile, I truly feel as if I'm doing the right thing. For her and for everyone else. Aww. At this point, his laser is hanging limply by his side. You've also been gradually lowering your revolver, not quite aiming at him anymore, but still at the ready, just in case. His words swim around inside your head. For the first time in what feels like ages, you waver. Before you see two paths. Oh, shit. Shit. Can we go back? Or you have to do this. You have to do this. You have to do this. But do you really? You know who you are, what you could do. You have the capacity to do either of these things. And yet, the only place the choice ever truly lies in is within yourself, whether you decide to listen to or ignore what your own soul already knows at once. The feeling is all too familiar for me. I understand the doubt, the fear. But perhaps you need a moment to consider the weight of this decision more carefully. It is no trouble. I will wait for you. You will see what's right in the end, Cecily. Because you will listen to her. You have to do this. You have to let him go. So you do. You push the safety of your revolver back on, and the click makes Occeus startle. He's tense, shoulders clenched and jaw locked, and you know his eyes are boring into you even though you can't see them. Once again, he seems to be expecting you to say something. Once again, you let your actions do the talking. With a smooth, practiced motion, you holster your gun. Occeus's shoulders slump. What are you doing? What are you doing, you think quietly to yourself. You breathe out through your nose in a sharp puff. I'm letting you go. You direct a command to Eves for Occeus to hear. Eves, dump latest snapshot files. You watch the screen as it permanently deletes some of the most important secrets corporate could ever hope to know. The silence that follows your statement hangs over the two of you like a thin veil. You stare at each other. Occeus feels for the wall behind him with one hand. He stumbles back and braces himself against the surface. His laser classes to the ground. Oh. I see. He slumps against the wall, running a trembling hand through his hair. Then, to your surprise, a quiet peal of laughter spills from him. Thank you. His voice has a watery quality to it, and when he lifts up his head again, his face lights up with the first smile you've seen from him since you walked through the front door. Aww. Thank you, Miss Yapara. The gratitude in his voice is slightly overwhelming. You glance aside and clear your throat. Yes, well. You're welcome, Dr. Coliad. Do try to keep your doors properly locked next time. You're still clutching the vial in your hand. At this point, the blood inside has started to melt, and it sloshes around in its container as you lift it up. You consider it for another moment before putting it back in its original place and closing the door. There's an undercurrent of something left unsaid permeating the room as you both stand there. With your back still turned to him, you heave a sigh, then you shoot him a glance over your shoulder. I'm sorry about this. about what I almost did. I'll spare you the details. It's a long story and we just went through a whole situations together. It is alright. At this point, he's already pushed off the wall and assumed a more collected stance. You press your lips together, furrowing your eyebrows. Is it? Well, perhaps not quite. But I am okay with it at least. Were you sent here to look for the blood in the first place? You reluctantly nod. His mouth twitches up into a smile, a deep chuckle leaving his throat once more. Perhaps I should have gathered that much from the start. I am not always the most perceptive, but I know just how hard it is to do your job. It's a difficult balance to maintain. I am sure you meant well. I try my best to do what's right. That is really all we can do. Thank you again. Just don't tell anyone I did this for you. Especially not Miss Heckrix. Consider my lips sealed. With a final nod in his direction, you start making your way out of the room, only to stumble into Rogi. He sort of looks like he wants to give you a hug. You pat him on the back, glancing over your shoulder at Occeus one last time before you reach the corridor. He waves at you, and you wave back. Then you leave. As you approach your motorbike, a familiar din echoes through your sound chasms. You know who you'll hear on the other end of the line. After all you just went through, you really don't feel like answering. The weight of your decision has barely started to settle on you. You feel slightly dazed. A moment passes and you take a deep breath. Then you notify Eves to answer. What do you want? Such blatant hostility. I don't know what else you expected from me. At first I expected nothing at all, but then you started to surprise me. That's why I chose you. Did you like what you found? You have every reason to believe that they know exactly what just happened, but you're not feeling particularly agreeable right now. I don't know what you're talking about. I never found anything past your last little scheme. What a terrible waste. And after Miss Heckrix seemed so thrilled about the tip I gave her too. I knew she would take the bait once I told her what she wanted to hear. A shame. Your blood turns to ice in your veins. His words settle inside you heavy, like an irradiated lump of ore slowly poisoning you from the inside out. What did you just say? The raspy chuckle that comes out of your earpiece feels like a serrated blade dragging across your skin. I see you continue to listen whenever I tamper with those you hold dear. Yes, Cecily, that little insider was me. You should know firsthand just how easy it is to play pretend. Even more so when you're viewed as a... what was it? Ah yes, an unhinged, voice-changing criminal. Your blood boils. A scream threatens to burst out of you in your frustration, but you keep your grip, just barely. You refuse to give them the satisfaction. So this is where you wanted me. Was this why you took the filter? No, not for this place in particular. Let's call this little detour a necessary raising of the stakes. You see, this story that I've invited you to be a part of, it has rules. And you have been following them exquisitely. I did lead you here for a reason, just as I have everywhere else. You're simply not in a position to grasp the bigger picture yet. You want to call this a load of bullshit, but the more you think about it, the more certain coincidences start to align in your head. If you had not gone to Husk's barn, animated humorous symbol would have meant nothing to you, and if you hadn't been led to Orica, you wouldn't have had any knowledge of their methods in the first place. Maybe even Dario's premeditated. Maybe that girl in the dress wanted you to notice her. Are they giving you hints on purpose? What purpose does it serve for you to lead me on this path? What purpose does a path serve for anyone? I'm going to take a drink. God, nearly an hour and 10 minutes. One would assume it eventually leads somewhere. You saw some of the breadcrumbs yourself, didn't you? The blood is merely a circumstantial byproduct of this particular chronicle. This is bigger than all of us. Our lives have always been and always will be superfluous. Irrelevant, forgettable set pieces in a grand order we cannot comprehend. I simply want to prove a point on my way out. What fucking point do you have to make? That harming others yields result? That it makes some sort of statement? Oh, perhaps the lapdog can think for herself after all. Fuck off. You have no moral ground to stand on. And you're wasting all the precious time you have left before I find you on meaningless diatribe. We'd all like to think ourselves better than those we view as inferior. You go out of your way to aid some, yet neglect others. Why is that, I wonder? At the end of the night, life is all the same. Hollow, self-indulgent. This is why we need cleansing. This is what I wish to prove to you. You are absolutely vile. I am the cure. Like SCP-049. I will find you. Of course you will. That's what I want you to do. You just need to go through the necessary steps beforehand. Pacing is very important after all. Take a good look at the setting regulator. You'll wish to remember it. I've made you an appointment with an acquaintance of mine. You're preemptively welcome. Behind the cracked skull of Baragoneth, 3 days. A hermit will await you. And if I refuse, we both know you will not. That's why you're special. You grit your teeth, and the line goes dead before you have the chance to reply. A weary sigh leaves you, fading into the barren landscape. You stand there for a few seconds, glaring at a pebble on the ground, and as you hop back onto your bike, a solitary course of action begins to form in your mind's eye. You know now which hands are the wrong ones, or at least you have a better idea of it. You know that this isn't solely about a vial anymore, that this isn't a standard mission to retrieve a stolen object. Maybe this is against orders, more than your usual flirting with disobedience. Maybe you don't fully understand what you're getting yourself into. But you do know one thing. Something this entire escapade thus far has taught you. This case doesn't have to be about what others want from you. It doesn't have to be about anything other than what you see it as. An opportunity to do right by this world, to stop someone who's more eager to abuse it. You're doing this for yourself now. And as such, you press forward. Ooh, spooky! Damn. I liked that. I really did. Ooh, next episode will be Mashiri! Ooh! Oh, I'm so excited!